trying to rob you. I'm trying to fucking help you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Erasmus Expeditions. We have a very special session of Beneath the Banner's Shadow this evening. We are going to be changing systems. The system that we use to play this campaign that has been ongoing now for almost going on 5 years. So, I don't think we're going to get too deep into the weeds as far as why we are changing systems. If you follow most of the news that goes around in the hobby community, you're probably aware of a few corporate decisions that are a little less than ideal for the situation. So there's been a couple of us who have had a discussion, who have broached the discussion at least, of trying something new. And I think that's what we're going to discuss this evening. But I thought that it was a good opportunity to show that this kind of stuff happens, even in long-established, long-running groups who have been playing together, even the same story, and that it is possible to make even such a fundamental change and for the game to survive and possibly even thrive through that. So I thought it was important to allow all of you who are fans of this story and this campaign and these characters to kind of get a peek into the inside of what this kind of change can look like. Hopefully, if we do this right, at least a successful way to handle a transition like this. So, with that being said, the system that we have kind of discussed as a strong contender for what we're going to be switching to is called Cortex Prime. This game was designed by Cam Banks, was the designer, and it is a beautiful book that's comparable in size to any one of the core rulebooks from D&D 5e, but it is its own standalone system. This one book has all of the information that you would need to play the game or to run the game. It is a very different kind of system, so we're going to be kind of going over how different it is and make some decisions about how we want to use it to further tell our story. But before we get into all of the nitty-gritty about all of that, I do want to go ahead and give the same warning ahead of this conversation that I give at the beginning of all the games that you see here on the channel, because we are all adults, as far as I'm aware, even Baron. And there's going to be mature language that comes up, almost as a guarantee, and very possible that mature subject matter may still be a part of this conversation, as well as immature humor, which is also a staple of the channel. If those kinds of things don't bother you, then please, you are welcome to join us. If you have any kind of comments or questions about kind of what we're talking about throughout this evening, please feel free to post them in the chat. If you're live with us, I will do my best to try to keep up with what's being said in there as well, so that we can try to address that. But yeah, I'm going to pass things over to my players so that they can do any kind of introductions and say where you might be able to find them on the internet, that kind of usual stuff, before we actually get started. So we're going to start with Baron.
Hello, everybody. I'm Baron. I play Masaka Tord. Super excited to perhaps find a system more tailored to the games we play, as I see RPGs as more of like the train, not necessarily, that's a good word, the vehicle in which we tell our stories, and if the mechanics don't emphasize storytelling and plot development of our characters and story, I don't really care for it. So if the Cortex Prime system aids us, I only want to see where it takes us from here. Other than that, really don't have too much to report. I'm still alive.
Which is fantastic. Sometimes, you can't ask for more than that. I have a good friend that every time I asked him how he was, he said, "Well, I woke up this morning." I was like, that's a great philosophy to have, because not everybody can say that. But yeah, man, always glad to have you here. And I think you're right. A system is best defined by how well it fits any given story that's being used, that's using it, I guess is the best way to put that. And D&D, I love D&D still. There's still a lot about it that I like, and I have another campaign on the channel here that'll probably continue to play it. But it's not perfect for everything. There's a lot of really
half the
interesting.
time we don't even roll dice or anything like that.
Exactly.
So if there's a system, then it's like, oh my gosh, we've used the system every session for the last 10 sessions. It's incredible. Like, I'm here for it 100%.
Yeah. I think that this is gonna be a fresh surprise for those of you who have never played this before. I know that it was whenever I stumbled across it and started learning it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what's gonna change, if anything, or if it ends up indeed actually being an even better fit. So I'm looking forward to it. All right, next up we have Kaeryn.
Hello, everyone. Kaeryn, also known as Myth and Gears. I don't have anything to say about much right now. I don't know Cortex Prime, and I'm really excited to learn a new system and see what it has to offer.
Yep, fantastic. Happy to see you again, as always, Kaeryn. I think once you get the hang of it, I do think that you'll really like it. Just knowing the kind of player that you are and the discussions that we've had before, I really do think that this will be a system that you end up enjoying. I could be wrong, but we'll see. Hopefully, Josh will be joining us sometime soon. But if not, then he will be missed, and we'll get his input before we make any kind of final decisions and whatnot. But for the meantime, we're going to skip over Lord Eddard Pendrake, and the next up is Steve.
Hey, that's me. That's about what I got. No, so I've done a little bit of reading into the Cortex Prime side. I'm not super familiar with it, but I really appreciate how like modular it is. So I do think we're gonna get some mileage out of being able to tack in things that are fitting for us and eschew with things that are not. It's kind of one of the pitfalls of these D20 systems as a whole is everyone goes, well, you can just mod D&D to handle that, and sometimes you can't. So it's good to see systems that are modded or built to specifically allow that to happen. So one of the things I'm interested to see is when we do add these mods, because we have so many spellcasters in the group, is how are we going to accommodate that? So we'll get to it.
Yeah, definitely. And that's definitely a place where I think we're going to feel the most adjustment is going to be in that area. I'm hoping that we can come up with something that is satisfactory, especially for those of you who do rely on magic. Hopefully we can make it something that is still fun to engage in and doesn't feel wrong or off for the way that we've portrayed the characters so far. But yeah, it's a really, really bespoke kind of system, and I think one of the, like you said, one of the big failings for me that I would have to point out about D&D is that it is so heavily combat oriented, and this group just does not, even though it's a fairly martial outfit, combat is not your first solution typically, and if and when we do get to combat, it is usually over very quickly. So I think that combat in this is going to be about the same, but we'll have to see. I am looking forward to it though. Okay. Last but certainly not least, we have Eli.
Hey everybody, I'm Eli. I am playing Sir John Lightenore as always, but I'm very excited about this new system. I also just wanted to say thanks to all my fellow players. I was the guy who kind of prompted us to change. I feel like I've been kind of cooling off about D&D for a long time, like years we're talking, and I was like, like I just I'm sure it would be nice if we could change, but I don't know. I don't want to bring that up or whatever. And this is just a testament to like, hey, folks, when you're playing a game, if you've got thoughts, share them with the group and see what happens. Because I floated the idea to everybody, and everybody was really receptive. So it worked out, and I'm really excited. I'm completely new to Cortex Prime. I bought the PDF like 10 minutes ago, so that's how new I am. And I'm stoked to see where we go with this.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I'm thrilled that you brought it up. I would much rather somebody come to me whenever there's that kind of a struggle, an issue, whatever, and discuss it openly and honestly, so that we can try to find a solution that makes everybody happy. Because ultimately, that's what this is about: is having a good time. And if not everybody is having a good time, then we need to find a fix if we can. So I'm really happy that everybody kind of seemed to feel the same way, and hopefully this will be a good solution. Cortex it's a bit daunting at first, I will admit. Whenever I first started looking into it, I will preface this by saying that I am not an expert with Cortex Prime. I have run a trilogy using it here on the channel. It was a Firefly game. It was a ton of fun. I absolutely fell in love with the system. But I had to do about 2 months of research trying to understand how to play this, because it is a massive departure from most of the role-playing game systems that I've encountered before. Usually with a role-playing game system, the rules are fairly fixed. They're fairly established, and you can tinker with them, you can modify them, you can introduce new things and take some parts out, but you have to be pretty delicate with that most of the time. Cortex Prime is the exact opposite. It's like a piece of IKEA furniture. It comes all together in a box, and you have to decide how it kind of goes together. You have to decide which pieces you're going to use and which ones you're not. So it's very customizable. And I think that that's probably one of its strengths. Probably not its greatest strengths, honestly. So we'll get into a little bit more about that in just a second. But what I wanted to touch on is the main dice mechanic for Cortex Prime. As always, if there's any time that y'all don't understand something, if you have a question or a concern, please just let me know, and I'll stop what we're doing and make sure that you understand, because I would much rather that you understand fully than barrel you through all of this and you not have a clear idea. Okay? All right. Does anybody have anything else that they want to say or add before we kind of start diving into this?
I have two things, actually.
Two things.
First and foremost, I am also glad that Eli said something, because this game in particular, there are so many episodes where we don't do any dice rolling or anything related in any kind of realistic sense to the mechanics of D&D, that it doesn't necessarily make sense to make this our primary engine. Second is a question. Have you run any other systems within Rossbean?
So the actual answer to that is no. Because, well, other than other versions of Dungeons and Dragons. So I have run
that's
it.
not the
Yeah.
outside of D&D.
So no, not technically. In the early days of what Rossbean kind of became, we played often without any system at all. It was literally just a bunch of us kind of sitting around and narrating what we thought would be really cool for characters to do and that kind of stuff. So in a abstract way, kinda, but no. D&D has definitely always been what I've used to run Rostfiend, so it is definitely a little bit of new ground for me. So I'm excited to see what that's going to mean. So
I'm sure this will come up within like us building the modular sense of this game. But is there anything specific that you want retained, like paramount, on your side of things as Rostfiend that you want to see come out of this? Is that a question that you can answer right now, or is that something we have to do together?
I don't know, to tell you the truth. The only things that I can think of are all like aesthetic and story and narrative driven. There might be places where the transition kind of causes a little bit of an issue, and I'll have to stop and think for a second. Wait, hold on, what does that mean now? But overall, I don't see any gaps from far away. So we'll see what happens, I guess.
Well, I'm excited to join you on this maiden voyage.
Get the champagne ready. Break it on the bow.
Like a Bud Light in the fridge or something. I don't know.
Close enough to champagne, my friend. Yeah. Okay. Anything else that anybody wants to touch on before we push this thing in the water and see if it floats? No? Okay. So like I said, the main dice mechanic, which is kind of the heart of the game, it's really the only like steadfast constant is the conflict resolution. Is that you will always choose your two highest die. Well, you will always choose 2 dice from your dice pool, regardless of how big it is. You'll always choose 2 dice to add together as your total outcome for that particular roll. If you roll in any dice that are a 1, those cannot be added to your total, and they instead count as a hitch, which we'll get into later. So with your dice pool, you choose 2 dice to add together for a total to give, and then you typically choose a 3rd die from your die pool as your effect die, which is basically how profound your given action is on the situation. The dice pools are all formed from dice of different types. So you might roll 2d6, a d4, and a d8 for a particular check. The effect die, the number that you roll on that does not count. The only thing that matters is the die type itself. If you don't have a 3rd die to assign as your effect die, then the effect die defaults to a d4. Okay? So that's the core mechanic of conflict resolution in Cortex Prime. Almost everything that you do is going to come down to some variation of that. Does that, at least in some facet, make sense so far? Yeah? Okay.
Is there like
awesome.
there's like a set number that you're trying to beat as prescribed by for the number you're adding together?
Yeah, so there's target numbers and then opposed rolls,
exactly.
Right?
Yep, there's both. Just like in D&D, where sometimes there's this set DC and sometimes it's a roll off between 2 different people. Same kind of situation. Okay. Yeah, there will sometimes be a specific set number that you need to hit, and sometimes it'll be opposed to me gathering a dice pool and rolling it together myself. But the way that I formulate my totals is, for the most part, done the same way that it is for you as players. So the kicker in the way that Cortex Prime functions is that what we get to choose are all of the different aspects. In this setting, or in this system, they're called traits. Each trait is how you derive what dice get added to your dice pool. So if Dungeons and Dragons, for example, were kind of told through this same principle, then you might, if you were attacking with a sword, you might add your strength value die to your dice pool. You might add your skill in athletics to this roll. You might also get a die because you are an accomplished knight, and you would gather your dice pool that way from various different places on your character sheet, the different traits that kind of make up who they are. You would build the dice pool out of those, roll it together, and then you get to pick the 2 dice. I say not necessarily the highest, because that's not always what you want to do, but usually that's what you want, is to take the 2 highest results, total them together, and that's the number that you would give as the result.
Now, that being said, the actual traits themselves, outside of like your elevator pitch of your character, right, which is always like a core mechanic of the game, is my understanding. The rest of the traits, whether there are stats or skills or powers or relationships, is part of what we're going to be working on tonight, selecting those pieces and putting them in. All right, perfect. And then I do have a mechanics question. I don't know if when you want me to interject these questions, because I don't want to leapfrog too much. All right. So one of the really concerning parts about me reading through Cortex, right, is the way they handle damage, death, and hit points. Air quotes. Okay. Because there's not like you have a number of hit points per se. It's you roll your die, you select your effect die. The opposing person rolls their die, they select their effect die. If you beat their total and your effect die is higher than theirs, you have removed them from the scene, is my understanding. And that's generic, like baseline. So without hit points, how does healing work? Right? Like how does question. Right. And so I've been noodling this, and I'm like, all right, so is there an ability that gets to does Dain get to reduce one of his friends' antagonists' effect die, or increase their effect die for purposes of staying in combat? You know what I mean? How do you do that? And I don't necessarily, we don't need to scroll down on it right this second, but that is one of my nagging concerns with this, because Sir John, for instance, one of his abilities, or a lot of his focus, is these flourishing ways in which he deals damage. Same thing with Ari, right? And again, since damage is very abstract for Cortex, I'm just curious, to have that in the back of our minds as we're building this, of how we want to still be able to represent those abilities that we base these characters around.
Yeah, and it's absolutely a concern that I have. I think that we'll be able to make it work, because I know that there is already stress or strain. I can't remember which they call it in this system, but you can impart physical harm, and by default, yes, it typically removes a character or an element from a given scene. But I think on my first read through, whenever I read through this before, that there are mods that you can apply to have it be more lethal. That's certainly something, even if it doesn't exist in the baseline book itself, that's something that we can modify in as much as we need. So I think we can land on something. Sorry, go ahead.
I have opened PDF and I'm reading through it. So I'm making progress on my experience. And I see that there's a section called Assets and Complications, and it sounds like, your main thing, your elevator pitch, is a trait. Assets and Complications are also traits, but they're emergent in the scene. They happen as you go. And it sounds like complications are the sort of things I took a wound to the leg, and so if that affects something going forward, then there's a die that gets increased or something.
Right.
in that way.
That's exactly right. Assets and complications they work very similarly to traits, but they are typically temporary. They develop because of something that has happened in the scene. It is, you are, trying to infiltrate this particular group, and you happen to have this solid piece of information on your side. That would be an asset. And they typically go away either after a scene or after just time passes, something like that. And I think you can choose sometimes to elect to make them into a permanent benefit for your character.
Cool.
It's one of the things you can spend your advancement points on, I believe, because there's not like traditional leveling so much in this game. But yeah, combat is something that I know that I want to keep as a part of this. When I ran this before, I ran it, like I said, a Firefly game, and when I was building the modules together, the traits together for that game, I knew that I didn't want it to focus much on the shootouts and the skill checks and things of characters, because for me that's not what Firefly is. So in that one we derived dice for the dice pools from things like relationships and emotions and values, things that kind of define who the characters are a lot stronger. And I think for our game, we're probably going to end up dabbling in a little bit of both, because combat is important still, even though it's not something that always happens in this game. And likewise, I know that healing is also important. So I think if there's not something that exists in the book already, it's easy enough to invent your own trait. Because again, the principle is so simple. It's literally this is how these are represented, and you simply choose to use one when it's appropriate, and it has a die assigned to it that then goes into your dice pool. So it's usually pretty simple to kind of come up with your own traits and how they work. But it is definitely something that I want to keep in the foreground of the conversation, Steve. So thank you. Welcome in, Josh. Howdy. We're not too terribly far into things, so hopefully, if you have any questions, just let us know.
Don't mind me. I'm just a dad on the run, trying to eat my dinner. So
no worries. So there's not typically any kind of modifiers to the rolls in this, as far as like numerical modifiers. Most adjustments happen to the dice themselves. Dice are stepped up or stepped down by die type, depending on circumstances. So if you have acquired a new saddle for your horse for a tournament, but it's just for that tournament, and your riding skill or your horse die is normally a D8, then we could argue that for the tournament, any roll that you're making using that horse is a D10 instead. So we can certainly play around a lot with that, which is always really nice. Mod called life points, if you want to get that granular. Yeah, like I said, I was pretty sure there was something like that in the book. Plot points. Plot points are kind of the meta currency of the system. They're a little more baked into the general rules than something like inspiration points in D&D. But they're earned whenever you roll ones, called hitches. So when you roll a hitch, it may end up being not great for your roll in the moment, but you get a plot point as kind of a counter, a consolation prize, if you will. You can also earn them by doing things similar to inspiration. If you do something really badass, if you have a great scene of role playing, if you figure out a really cool narrative story beat or something, your other players decide that you had a moment that is worthy of a thumbs up kind of thing, then you might get a plot point. And there's a variety of different ways that you can cash them in. Again, we'll make sure that all of that stuff is touched on before we actually start playing, so that you can know how they can benefit you. But it's usually stuff like getting to step up a die for a scene, or adding an asset to a scene that wasn't established ahead of time, that kind of stuff. We touched on assets and complications. So, like I said, the main pieces, if you will, of the game are called traits, and that's definitely kind of the different things that generate the dice for your dice pool. But there's also mods, which are a different thing in Cortex Prime, and mods are kind of like hacks for the normal rule systems that are kind of in place. One of which is like kind of what Steve has already talked about, there being kind of like a more lethal version of the way to handle strain or stress. Those are kind of mods that you can come up with. There's a number of them that are listed in the book that are kind of recommended and already created, but it also encourages you to come up with your own if you want. For example, with the Firefly game, emotions was not a trait that was from this book. It was something that I came across someone else having created for a different game, and they based it off of the Pixar movie Inside Out. They had kind of drawn inspiration from that movie and built this little trait system to use with their Cortex game, and it made a lot of sense. So I took what they had and kind of reworked it just a little bit, and used it in that game, and it worked beautifully. So I definitely think that I feel confident that we could manufacture anything that doesn't already exist. Let's see, what else? Special effects are a different part of the game, also called SFX. These are like specific conditions or drawbacks, costs that you can kind of sometimes activate, or not always intentionally activate, that will sometimes alter or influence dice results and the story. Sometimes even it'll kind of change elements of the narrative. So those are a lot of the time the way magic is typically handled is through special effects. So we'll probably take a closer look at that to see if that or a modified version of that might work as far as the magic goes. Okay, so I think that's basically the gist of the rundown of the overview of the system itself. Does anybody have any kind of questions or concerns about that part before we start discussing what traits we might want to include as a part of?
You had mentioned that when you roll, it may not always be the highest rolled dice that you're going to take. Is that, and I may be very far off here, so please, but is that because one of the dice you're going to roll, or you're going to select to be the dice code of your effect die? And even though it may not be, like if you roll a D10 for that and it comes up a 4, you still may want the effect to be challenging to overcome, even though the affect of it was lower.
Right. Yeah, if you're going up against, someone that, or a challenge that you don't think is going to be difficult for you to overcome numerically, you might decide that a larger die type is better used as your effect die than to go into your total, because you want the success that you have to be profound. You want to have it, a large impact on the given situation. So yeah, that's really, I think, the only situation that I can think of off cuff where you would not want to use your highest total for the result of your roll. Lynn Jones is in chat, and she says stress plus recovery rolls plus SFX. So I believe that's referring to healing, probably.
It is. So as you've been talking, I've been sort of like perusing, and there is stress, or if you want to be more granular, there are life points. Mm-hmm. Stress is like you can apply stress through different means, right? So perhaps if we're looking at as stress as what's going on in the scene, and it is just tormenting to the characters and really overbearing, that might cause stress. On top of being hit by the bad guy might cause stress, and that accumulation of stress can take you out of a scene. Whereas life points sort of are the more granular version. You can take real damage, or you can sort of take, non-lethal damage that will combine, either remove you from the scene or knock you unconscious. So either one is very good. The other thing I think to look at as we're sort of diving into what mods is, the roles are pretty interesting. They're sort of like broad sweeping, like the recommended ones for fantasy are warrior, priest, wizard, rogue, bard. And with like bard comes the use of social skills, performance-based magic, knowledge of culture and legends. And so like I think that sort of replaces the classes of D&D, but you could tailor those a bit more, right? Like for what we've seen, Eddard isn't necessarily the bard who gets up at the tavern is like he's much more the lore associated bard, the charismatic speaker. And so maybe it's not the musical skills, it's the ancient knowledge, it's the et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly. And you can get as abstract or as defined as you kind of want within all of these. So like for roles, we could do it to where it's verbatim, the classes that are available from D&D, or like you're saying, we could, because there's only really 5 characters that we need to concern ourselves with, we can make it as specific, as fine-tuned as you want for what role you perform within the group. So yeah,
I noticed the role for warrior includes maintaining gear, so you see it's actually really appropriate that I made Dain roll that barrel up the hill so often.
No, that makes a lot of sense. If you look right below that, between warrior and priest, it also says petulant child. And complaining is one of the core values there.
Perfect. I was going to ask if we should include resentment as like an emotional, like.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
I don't know, but I'm still hardcore stuck to the idea of using the attributes and definitely tuning 2 of them to be the fealty and woe stats. Like I think that should be a.
Yeah, no, you mentioned that before, and I think it's a fantastic idea. I'm actually going to make a note about it so that I don't forget about it. And
they do talk about in the system, like 2 of the stats that are often used are courage and faith. And I think if your fealty becomes your faith and your woe is your courage, like I think that's, even though it would be the antithetical stat, right? Like your woe is not necessarily something you want to roll all the time,
right?
Because it is triggering a bad memory. It's triggering calling on something. Like the remembering of Ansel being hung, or whatever the case is. So you would be trading role play of terribleness for having to die in your pool.
Well, one of the fantastic things about the trait that, okay, so in the book it says regardless of what you run, you should always include the trait known as distinctions, and that is the typically 3 like high view definitions of who your character is, something that is, very defining. One of the ones that I ended up using in the Firefly game was how do you want to die? Was literally the name of the distinction. And the answer to that distinction is something that should inform a lot about your character. And the distinction die figures into almost every role. One of those three typically is almost always a part of you rolling. But you can choose as a player, instead of rolling the die that you have assigned to a given distinction, you can choose to roll it as a hindrance, and you add it in a negative way instead. But doing so, you get a plot point, I believe.
So is that similar to when you take your sort of like your elevator pitch die? I don't know the proper term for that. Like normally it would be a D6 or a D8, and for the round you drop it to being a D4.
Yes.
And you get a plot point instead. Because D4s are almost always negative, right? Like that's one of the things about Cortex is they're almost always used as a hiccup rather than a bonus.
Right. And the only real reason for that is because they have a 25% chance coming up as a hitch. So that's really the only reason, why they have such a, it's a bad thing. But there's plenty of places where, a D4 is just the default, because it's, you haven't spent any points in that or what have you. So yeah, it's really interesting, and I think that there might be something there with the distinctions. We're looking at like calling it, I'm using this distinction of my character as a negative, which certainly in this campaign has been done, time and time again. The things that, define you tend to be the things that kind of crop up and bite you in the ass the hardest. That's certainly a lesson that I think most of your characters understand by now. Let's see. Any other questions or concerns about anything before we roll into traits? No? Does any of this make sense at all? Or does everybody have that kind of buzzing in the back of their skull where it's kind of numb? Again, please don't feel any shame in admitting so. Again, it took me 2 months of like digging to make sense of all of this, because it was not something that my brain wanted to latch onto.
Well, I think that digging paid off, because I'm feeling pretty like well informed at this point. I think you're doing a great job.
Good, thank you. I appreciate that. I could be getting this way wrong. Like I said, I am rusty, and that's only on what I knew before. So, but again, like I didn't run D&D 5e as per the way that it's supposed to run out of the book, so I doubt that I will do the same with this system. But I have it on Cam's blessing that as long as it's working for us, that it's good. So.
Another interesting idea is, did you use the Doom pool when you did your Firefly game?
I did. That was one of the things that I didn't fully understand, whether it was supposed to be kind of like a per session thing or a overall thing. So
like
I used
the
it-ish.
brief look at it, is it supposed to be like the countdown clock, right? Like as things are building, that Doom pool can build. And those dice in the Doom pool could be used by the storyteller to complicate matters.
Correct.
I think if sort of splitting the difference and saying that if your fealty and woe aren't distinctions, if your fealty becomes a distinction or a stat, but the woe is the woe pool rather than the Doom pool. And just as like the plague is spreading, things feel hopeless. And I think that everyone that I have the pleasure of playing with in this group does such a great job of narrating the moments of helplessness that increasing that Doom pool, feeling it paced even outside of combat or outside of when we were in Mornington and like the horde of zombies, like the way that we narrate our own woe in the world would be enough to generate those dice, those increases into the you know, the pool for the woe pool, which, you know, again, just a thought.
Yeah, no, I think that's brilliant. Yeah, and from my limited understanding of the way that it functions is effectively like when I'm building my threats for like a given encounter, like you said, I can draw from that doom pool, which diminishes it somewhat, but it makes the situation that I'm rolling for a little more heightened, a little more dangerous. But what that does is your successes in that encounter are taking the threat away. They're diminishing the overall doom or woe or what have you, not only in the given scene, but also in the overall pool.
And that's exactly what I was thinking. I'm sorry to talk so much, guys. I just, the more
No,
I
please.
was very hesitant about the system to begin with. I don't I'm not a big fan of fate because to me it's a little loosey goosey, right? Like it is I'm the super cop. I shot you. No, you didn't. Yes, I did. Like that's how fate comes across to me. Maybe I've just had bad experiences. But when I was reading the Doom pool and thinking about it in terms of this campaign, I was brought back to Sir John fighting the Boar Knight, the Black Knight. You know, and we know he's a big badass, right? We know that at that point, this dude's a better fighter. He's mechanically more levels than Sir John, right? And if part of that is represented by the woe pool, right? So like, even if this guy is just a straight across the board D6s or D8s for all of his physical stats, you know, so on and so forth. If the woe pool is set at a D10, my understanding is that you can choose to use that D10 to replace a die that guy would normally roll, right? And that's part of that is that despair that Sir John's feeling. Part of it is that helplessness. Part of it is his father's dying. Why did we have to, you know, all of that sort of compounding makes the bad guy more bad, right? It makes the situation more difficult.
Yes.
And I
exactly.
I love that concept. That the environment and the story are making things more difficult.
That is one of the like the tenets of Cortex Prime. Even throughout the book, if you read through this book, you'll run into language over and over and over again that is encouraging you to think about your sessions like episodes of a television series. You think in scenes. So like, this is this kind of scene. This is this kind of scene. And you're encouraged to build your encounters around that kind of principle. And furthermore, think about how each one of these scenes or encounters furthers the overarching story. Where does this fit in? It's not just a combat for the sake of having a combat. It needs stakes. It needs, the outcome is important. You know, it needs goals and motivations that are represented here. Something led to this. It could be as simple as a monster attacking, but even that, it needs to do something within the overall context of the story. So I really love that aspect of Cortex Prime. And because that's how we tend to play this particular campaign anyways, that's one of the reasons why when we started talking about what would be a good fit as far as a system goes, that's why this was the first thing that I thought of. Because my experience with Cortex Prime is that it lends itself very much to that style of play.
Yeah. It sounds like we've got a lot of really good principles, like guiding principles together for us, but it also sounds like we're starting to repeat ourselves. So like, if we're ready to move on to traits, I say we go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, cool. So there's quite a few traits that are presented in the book, and we can kind of go through them later to really define exactly which ones we want and which we don't. We can discuss it at length. But I definitely think roles is probably a great idea, because again, we're transferring from D&D 5e, so that seems to be a good place to start. But obviously that's open to discussion. One of the other ones I was thinking about implementing was abilities and skills, since again we have those already in associated with these characters. So I think that there's ways that we could keep those, whether we want to just port them directly over to the game, so it's still, you know, strength, dex, con, intelligence, wisdom, charisma, and we just assign dice to them as opposed to numbers and modifiers. Again, we can discuss whether we all feel like that fits and is necessary or not. I like the concept of some of the things that I used in the Firefly game. Like I said, I think relationships stands to be a good thing to include for this game in particular. It feels like a good fit. Emotions and values, I'm not as firm on as relationships, because I think we've established that relationships are very important. And then values and emotions, I don't know. I think that's something that we could talk about, how much mileage we might get out of including something like that. Whatever we need to look at to determine how combat and magic are going to work, for sure. Those are definitely things that I want to try to find some kind of trait for that we can use to represent. And then there's another part of the game that they're kind of like traits, but they function a little different, and they're called signature assets. They work very similar to assets and complications, except they are kind of like, one of the great examples that I came across when making the Firefly one was like Jane's gun, Vera, would be a signature asset. It's something that defines you, you know, but it's typically a thing that you can either have or not. It's not always with you necessarily, you know. Indiana Jones's hat. Trying to think of another great example. Oh, Arthur and Excalibur. These
You
kinds
mean
of things.
Sir John and the Falcon's Talon.
Exactly. Yeah, your magic items and things that you have gathered would be things that are signature assets. I definitely think that's part that we're going to include. It feels, again, a pretty direct correlation for a lot of the things that you've kind of gathered, titles and things of that nature, to your names as characters so far. Yeah. So those are the pieces I'm kind of looking at including so far. The ones that I have kind of gone through and saw that I felt were worth bringing up, at least. But I want all of y'all's input. I want you to tell me, not right now, not necessarily, but just, you know, in the month to come, I want to have a discussion about what we think fits, what we think doesn't, what you want to have available so that your character can do XYZ. But I'm excited to try this out with all of you and to see if it ends up being as good of a fit as I'm hoping that it's going to be. But yeah,
I got a question. In regards to, you said emotions, and what was the other thing attached to emotions? Values?
Not necessarily attached to, but another trait is values.
I meant like attached to as like you said, with, rather.
Oh yeah, when I mentioned them together, yeah, values.
I don't necessarily think we need those per se. I mean, values is debatable. I mean, perhaps I'd like to know a little bit more about what that would mean, but I feel like we are stuck in moral quandaries all the time that
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's necessarily pertinent.
Yeah. So, as far as just values, the ones that I'm just going to read it off of the Firefly character sheet, just because I happen to have it here available. But the values from the character sheet for Firefly were duty, glory, justice, love, power, and truth.
So that needs to be in there. That needs to be in there.
the way that works is it's a ranking system. So like you get a die of each type to distribute amongst those, or the way that we handled it in particular. You get a die type you get one of each die type to distribute how you see fit amongst that. So if justice is the most important to you, then that might be your, I don't think there are D20s in this system. Anyways, however it worked. That's an example of an array of values. And if a given scene, your character has a reaction that conjures their sense of that value up, then they can use that die in their dice pool. For example, if you were in a situation like in the very beginning of the campaign where this child is about to be executed, justly, unjustly, whatever, your character would have been able to add their justice roll, their justice die, from their values to their dice pool, because they felt that there was something about this situation that was either strongly justified or not. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Okay. And then emotions is somewhat similar. The emotions that I built for the Firefly game were anger, desire, disgust, fear, joy, and sadness. So they're not always going to be involved in a roll. But when emotional stakes are high and it feels appropriate, you as a player can ask, would this be the right spot to be able to call on my fear? And if it makes sense, then we can say, yeah, absolutely. I understand the narrative correlation that you're making. Throw your fear die in there.
Always throw the fear die. I'm always afraid.
That's no secret.
Tord, what wisdom do you have to share? Never stop looking over your shoulder.
Exactly. Also, just to touch on, we had the roles that we had in the game were Fixer, Heavy, Hotshot, Sneak, Talker, and Thinker. And so the way that we ended up working that was where it's not necessarily like you're just the warrior. It's your warrior is your highest die, but your next highest die might be in Rogue, or it might be in Spellcaster. You know?
I like that. I can dig that.
Mm-hmm.
As the dual classer, I like that too.
Yeah, it'll make Eddard feel probably a lot less like he's dipping into two separate pools.
Yeah,
more of
definitely.
Just, he's on Eddard's
You're more of a color wheel
path.
now, bud.
Yeah, because like with D&D proper, it's like unless you put like 4 or 5 points in. I mean, of course, you hit that level 3 like power spike that all the classes hit, but beyond that, I mean, you have to invest pretty deeply to feel like you're any sort of that role. So I do like that.
Well, and the nice thing about this kind of situation is there's not like a defined escalation of abilities that you are trying to eventually unlock. It's if you want to be a roguey type bard who doesn't sing, then you don't have to take this class feature at level 4 that doesn't really do anything for your character.
Right. Like Steve was saying, I'm not so much the singy bard, I'm more the lore bard.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm looking at some sample spreads of values, and it seems like, so should there always be, no, there's some here that don't have just 6. I was thinking if there are 6 die types, then does there have to be one for every die type?
No, I think I misspoke. I think you get like a default that they all start at, and then you get
Got
like
it.
so many tune-ups or downs that you can choose. There's a couple of different ways that you can establish the way traits work. They don't always break down the same way. The only thing that is constant is the output from the trait to your dice pool. It's always a die that you get to take and add to your die pool.
Got it. Because I was gonna say, like, it might be cool for each of us to name our characters like chief value, and that makes the list of the values. And especially if it's like a zero-sum game where gaining in one value means that you decrease another one or something, then it's like we're all gonna have our chief value maxed out, but then from there it's gonna be a grab bag about like, well, which one is my weakest value and which character has that as their strongest, and what does that say about our relationship together?
Sure, absolutely.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, do you want to start trying to touch on that now, or do y'all want to take time to kind of evaluate how to do that?
Well, I see that Steve had kind of like summarized what we were looking at porting over in the chat. And so we've got roles instead of classes, attribute instead of attributes, skills instead of skills. Relationships is a good idea. SFX might be a way to do magic. Abilities could be monk stuff or fighting styles. Signature assets is our cool stuff. And then values. It seems like that's a lot of things to me. So I find myself wondering, like, how can we boil it down? And maybe like assets and skills could be similar. If there's a way, or like attributes plus skills could be a counterpoint to values. So you've got kind of like the action components and you've got the drama components or something.
Potentially. Yep, potentially.
Yeah. Again, I just worry that the more you start combining stuff, the more like loosey it gets. Like,
Sure.
Well, and even having a large array of different traits that you have on your sheet, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to use all of those or even the majority of them for every role. There could be some roles that only would require your attribute and your role and then your distinction. And that could be the only thing that really applies to a given scene. There could be other times where it might make sense to roll one from everything, maybe.
Right. And maybe it is a thing where like the SFX versus like the abilities are one or the other, right? You either have the ability to do cool magic stuff or you have the ability to do cool martial stuff. And I think that works pretty well because there's nothing that any of us do that really blend too far the other way, except for maybe smiting, but that could just be a cool martial thing. Like, I don't know, or that could be representative of like, a value die being rolled along with.
So being as smiting is my cup of tea here. Personally, I would prefer more of like the special effect angle. Like if I'm looking at it as like a cartoon, like Tord or like a TV show, Tord isn't the guy that's doing all the cools. Like I block blows with my shield or my body. And my sword's cool and I cut things down with it, but I'm not usually doing the fighting styles or maneuvers. And like Tord blowing something up once with his sword to me would be like, put that in post.
Yeah, and again, like that's one of the biggest strengths about this is it leaves a lot to kind of how you want to frame it. It's about how it is a narrative first, and then go to the mechanics and decide how they best support what you've already established as far as the narrative goes. We know that this is the circumstances that we're in. We know that this is the way that Tord wants to approach the situation. And if you've already talked about going up, swinging your sword, and activating your smite, however that's going to look for Tord going forward, whatever language or description that it is necessary to kind of get that point across. Then we just go to the character sheet and say, okay, what aspects, what traits are going to make that role make sense?
I mean, we don't have to dig too deep into it. I feel like I'm comfy with it.
I think we have a lot to talk about and a lot to kind of parse through as far as the specifics and the nitty gritty about what of these is going to make sense and what isn't. But I'm pretty sure that we're going to be able to land on something that allows us to keep playing the way that we, more or less, the way that we have been.
Then I will say I do feel comfortable with the list we have now, being as, one of them is kind of an if, or two of them are ands or ors, and for the most part, it's kind of the same as what we already have, barring a lot of descriptor text of abilities and stuff. Because, I have most of my relationships mapped out, people that are important to me. Skills and attributes seem fairly straightforward if they are how I believe they are to be, and I'm good with it.
Okay, nice. Yeah, and again, there's a couple of different breakdowns of how some of these traits work. Sometimes it's everything starts as a D8, and as you get better at things, you can spend points to increase those die, or you can increase to add additional ones, and they start at a lower die type. There's kinds of different rules for how to break down how each individual trait works, but once you kind of get a peek at each of those, and you start to kind of understand how each of those little sub breakdowns kind of functions, and you keep, again, the golden rule of no matter what it says in this block, the outcome is always one of these dice is coming with me to my dice pool. As long as you kind of keep that in your mind as the fundamental basic, the rest of the system it becomes a little more second nature as you're playing it, which is kind of the case with any new system. But cool.
Seemed like Kaeryn had something to say forever ago.
Oh yeah. Did you not get a chance, Kaeryn? I'm sorry. I should have called on you sooner.
It doesn't matter anymore. I think we kind of covered it.
Do you have anything else you want to say or add?
No, I don't know the system, so I'm just
Is it at least somewhat making sense to you, or is it overwhelming?
It's making sense. I can't see the big picture yet, because
Sure.
I need to know I'm one of those people. I need to know all the little details, and then I can
totally
build them
get
together.
Is there a banter mechanic?
That's free.
Can I roll to banter? I need a buff for banter. I say some clever shit sometimes. You can add a
I think I'm also kind of in the boat with Kaeryn. I'm understanding it, but once we start to put things together and the pieces start to come together, the picture will be more clear for me. Yeah. But it seems, like I said in the group chat, it seems like as a group we won't really have a lot to kind of port over, being how narrative heavy that we are. It's like the crunch was always secondary to us. So
yeah, I would have to agree. And again, when I first started trying to look into the system, I had to watch an actual play of it, and even then afterwards I was still kind of scratching my head going, I just don't get how some of that works, how some of it functions. And then the rule book, which is gorgeous, and it actually has a ton of great information in it. It's not, because it's not a linear reference of rules the way a typical role-playing game is, because it is so modular, and some of it you can leave out and some of it you can Modify, it's difficult to just sit down and go from cover to cover and understand what the hell it's talking about. So I had the chance to play it one time. I joined the Cortex Prime Discord server, and I was lucky enough to get into a game, and that helped a ton because I could kind of see things in motion and bother the GM with some questions about, like, well, wait, why are we doing this? So I thoroughly encourage all of you to, if you have any kinds of questions, to please ask me, and if I don't know the answer, we'll find an answer together. So, okay, cool. All right, yeah. Does anybody have anything else that they want to add to the conversation at this point, or we just want to kind of go away with our thoughts into our separate corners for a little while and then chit chat as we can before we settle on something?
So we're looking at like a month before we really get back together.
Yeah.
And not to sound like we're assigning homework, but do people feel okay in that month sort of looking at the rules and out of the things that we've listed and chatted about, kind of going, hey, this is how I think, here's the 5 things I would pick, here's the 4 things I would pick, whatever. And then we can chat about that maybe a week or so prior to, like, even if it's just in text chat, like Karen's like, oh, hey, I think, monk abilities would be much better covered by special effects than they would be by abilities. And here's my why. And then we just take the best of everyone's worlds and just sort of.
Yeah, that's basically kind of what I'm hoping for.
Okay.
I'm going to go through the rules again myself with a finer tooth comb. For one, just because I'll need to know them for, at least theoretically, for running the game. But I also want to be able to field any questions that come up as best that I can. And to also just to have my own input I think that this is an important thing for us to include. This I don't know about being important, but if anybody's married to it, the kinds of things that we talked about tonight, only just in greater detail. But if each of you wants to kind of do the same, go through the rules, kind of see anything that absolutely you want to have as a part of the game, or adversely, if you come across anything you're just like, I really hate the concept of this, then we can either elect to not include that, or find a workaround, find a different way of doing that makes us happier as a group.
So I'm real horny for spreadsheets, and as we all know, I also take copious notes. And so would it be helpful for me to start like a document and a sheet where we can just kind of have our own sections to put notes together, and that way we can all kind of see what we're doing?
Yeah, we can set it up we can even do like a Google Doc type situation if that works for everybody.
That's what I'm planning, yeah. Google Doc and a Google Sheet, and that way we've all got little note spaces for whatever we need.
That'd be super good.
And really, everybody, don't feel bad if I drastically outpace you in the number of words that I put into those respective receptacles. It's my problem. It's not your problem.
We would expect nothing less, Eli.
I can't keep anything in here, so it's all got to go right over there.
Well, at least we can all see it that way.
The last thing I'd like to pitch, I know I've done a lot of talking.
No, you're good.
Like I really love the idea of the Doom pool, being the woe pool. But I want to throw this out there. What do you guys think about having a PC version of that? So that as we basically are building cool stuff ourselves, we're in the scene, like we're building up that, if it's the woe pool, it's the fealty pool, right? And that would give us a pool of dice collectively that could get pumped up.
Of people fealty to us?
Well, no, like it's us doing the things that make us us. It's us being heroes. It's us doing those awesome fairy tale banner things, and that puts those dice into that pool, so that when you have those moments where you come up against the shit, you're pressed against the wall. Sir John's like, well, I don't, I've got this, I've got a D6, I got a D8, but but there's a D10, there's a D12 over in that fealty pool, and he's going to use it, and then Eli is going to narrate to us this epic way in which everything we've been through or everything he's going through or whatever is allowing him to perform higher than normal. I love that concept. I don't know about you guys. I think it's like having shared what do you call them? Rerolls. Inspiration, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there is a system in place. I think it's a mod called Hero Dice. We ended up calling them Big Damn Hero Dice in the Firefly game. And they are individual, but if a mod doesn't already exist to make like a communal pool in addition to or in place of, then I think that that's absolutely something that we could do.
That's everything. I've run my mouth enough.
No, dude, it's great. Like I said, that conversation, that volley is what we need. That's what we're looking for. Nice. And we could even, on that same note, we might even be able to like take a note from what is it, Fantasy Flight Star Wars, where it's that pool exists as one pool and it shifts from woe to
that is yes I love that where they do the dark side light side points for you when you use them. The DM gets them and vice versa. I think that's incredibly good. Yeah, but that's the most brilliant storytelling point that Fantasy Flight did with that system.
That's incredibly good.
I'm not familiar with that. Does anybody have enough experience to elaborate?
Yeah, so yeah, Karen's run Genesis. Kaeryn, do you want to field that question? Do you want to
answer? This is FFG. I know they do a lot of this kind of stuff in their games, but I don't think I've ever played one. Actually, you know what? I played Legends of the Five Rings one time with Mr. Doty.
Yeah, so they took that into their Genesis game because they learned from their Star Wars, and they made this like more generic system, Genesis. And basically there's X amount of these points that you have. There's a pool, and it starts with them all in the player side. And for in this case, it's like one per player. So if we have 5 players, there'd be 5 points in the pool. And then as the players want, they want to do something cool, they want to do something that breaks rules, they want to do something better, they use one of these points to make that happen. But then that story point goes to the story master now. They get, so at later, the GM can go, hey, I want to make something harder on you guys. I want to make this tougher, this harder. And then they would spend it and it would go back to the players. And the whole point is that you use those and you pass them back and forth constantly to make plot things happen.
Yeah, that is brilliant. It's like an ebb and flow. I like that.
Yeah, it works particularly well in Star Wars because there's that constant back and forth between light side and dark side. And incidentally, it would work really well even in again here in Banners, because the more you all become grandiose, ingrained in society, the harder that woe comes knocking at the door.
Right.
So,
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, I think that could very much be at least worthy of looking at. How we would translate that into Cortex Prime, again, we'll have to kind of take a closer look at it and see what's going to be the best fit. But I'm confident that there is a way to make it work.
At the risk of giving away Baron's apparent high school name, it might be like having communal PP, right? Like communal plot points.
Exactly. Yeah.
but I 100% believe that he was called communal PP.
Lots of soap, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm buying it.
That's definitely a possibility.
I thought that was real funny.
I don't know why it broke me so bad.
Hilarious. That's usually my line.
I will say that I do have my value if we're still doing the one where we pick one each.
Yeah, I'll take that for sure.
Mine's gonna be loyalty.
Okay.
Mm.
That
I
makes
think
good
that
sense.
really is towards drive and everything.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that with the way that you've played Tord. Again, from the very, very beginning, where he decided to take that young woman's money to stand in as as a fighter before he found out that it was going to be against Sir John, and then went through it anyways because he made a promise. Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense.
I think Eddard's is going to be skullduggery. Let's just put that one on the list.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. I really
I don't know
honestly
about his value, but we'll work it in there.
Eddard's is love. Like, come on.
love. You think so?
I do.
I do think. I think
it's a pretty
so,
strong
too.
contender.
Yeah.
I'll have to think about it, but I think so too. The way he
Actually, I would say passion.
You think so?
I think
Why,
it's
why
passion.
passion versus love?
Because you fervently follow whatever your interest is, whether that's knowledge of lore. You do play instruments, and that does take like pursuing a skill. Your romantic interests are troublesome but intense. Like, we're good friends. You're good friends with Ari. You're like Matt. You have a lot of branches.
I don't know. I think the part that brings it back to love, though, right? Is he like Eddard has a love for everyone in the group. He has a love for
Yeah,
Most
I would
people-
agree either way.
the family
like-
he hasn't known. You know, like
That's
Even
kind of
for
the way
raising
it
Cleo.
sets him apart as a lord, as far as the peasants are concerned, or anybody that he's met that's like of the lower class. He doesn't treat anybody different than himself. So I guess love is probably pretty good. Or
Would it
passion.
be
I'll have to think about it.
devotion?
I don't know.
Well, the great thing
I mean,
is-
devotion and loyalty are kind of like
Yeah,
hand
that's
in
true.
hand. You think?
Mm-hmm.
I think
The
so,
great thing
yeah.
is like you don't have to necessarily even choose just the one. Once
Right.
we have the list established, you could have love as your first, and if passion, is also one, then passion could be your second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think of like you said, the most important one
Mhm.
to him to bring to the table. Like Tord is like, that was so easy for you. I don't.
Yeah, Tord's
it could not have been easy.
Tord's a dog, bro.
I mean, I can't see, and loyalty is perfect, but
Mhm.
Eddard's
Well, again,
it's a little bit more gray.
We've got time to
Eddard's
think about
value
it.
is complexity.
Kick the ball around a bit and see where it lands, where it does make the most sense. Usually a lot of these things, if it's not something that instantly comes to you, spending a little bit of time kind of thinking about it and talking about it with everybody who has interacted with Eddard over 5 years almost now, I think we'll definitely arrive at a suggestion eventually that's like, oh, that's absolutely, that's the right call.
Yeah.
I like the other thing he mentions about the values is it doesn't have like they talk about truth, right? You can have a truth value of 10. It doesn't mean you're honest. It just means that you feel a lot of
Right.
value in the currency of truth and subterfuge. So like I think Dane's gonna be optimism, right?
I can see that.
Even though like he has like that pessimistic like dourness about him, like that's what he wants for the world, right? Is the good.
Can I suggest hope as a more fantastic term?
I like that. I do. Thank you. I was struggling for that, so that's a great term. Hope is a
You
great
bet.
term.
Ari, do you have thoughts about what your main value is?
Fists.
Fists.
Punching. She's got
I
a
think-
sword too.
I think I have an idea, but I'm curious. I don't want to speak before.
No,
Kaeryn
go
does
for it, because
that.
I am terrible at putting a word on a concept.
This
That
has
is-
a lot of like hyphens in it, but it's not telling Dane what she should tell him, so he doesn't have to be upset about everything, and they fight. A lot of
I
Yeah,
hyphens.
thought about
putting
that.
that on a shirt.
I think Ari's value is secrecy.
Interesting.
Or is it secrecy or is it what's the forgive me, my English is terrible. Is like what is a term where someone doesn't like they play close to the chest, right? But like they don't want you to know how they're actually feeling. There's
Like
a lot of
privacy or stoicism or something.
Stoic.
Like that.
yeah. There's another word for it. I don't know. I'll dictionary or thesaurus it, but yes, I think that's like perhaps along those lines too, right?
Sure.
Hmm.
I don't know. Fists is pretty good.
It's-
This is I don't think that's disputable at all.
I feel like so we've been talking about having fealty and woe being kind of like opposing value or opposing traits, I should say. Fealty and courage strike me as two possibilities for values. Like Sir John,
True.
courage would be a really likely value for me because I have that quality of
Mhm.
like, oh, we can do this, no problem. It's not going to be a big deal. Mastery is something that's occurred to me as well because that's like the drive for everything that I do. But
Mm.
like fealty and courage, they both seem to have kind of a place in our values. And woe isn't really a value, so I don't know. That was kind of a pairing that I had seen as well.
Mm-hmm.
I like the courage for Sir John. Like I've been trying to think of previous scenes we've had in terms of this game and going or in this system and going, okay, how would mechanically it have worked in that? And like I really like the courage Sir John shows on the battlefield, but then like the timidity, the doubt that he has about being a ruler, about taking his dad's place, about that. Like I think that's a very interesting.
Yeah, it's like where my
Dynamic.
courage falters, right? Even though
Right.
even though we're each going to have a
Mhm.
main value, like you said, you know, the truth doesn't necessarily mean that you always tell the truth. It just means that weighs a lot on you.
Well,
Right.
that's one of the most interesting things about a character is when what you know them for gets called into question, when they can't rise to that occasion because something is hindering them. And now, in order to rise back to their normal, they're relying on friends, family to help.
I mean, and that's the thing. And Sir John is not ignorant to this
Right.
fault. You know, when he's in these situations, the first thing he's thinking about is like, "Fuck, dude, what do I do here?"
Yeah.
Yep. Like one of the ways that I built the emotion system for the Firefly game was that it wasn't the emotion that the character was wielding in the scene. It was the emotion that was impacting the character at the time. So the higher your die type was not the more control you had of that given emotion. It was how deeply that particular emotion affected and wielded your character.
Sure.
So if fear was a problem for your character, then that would probably be the highest rated die that you have. Because when you typically when it comes up, it's this stands the largest chance of throwing an issue into the works for you. I'll have to again revisit exactly the way that it worked, but I think it might have even been where the emotion die was added to the opposing roll. I think is the way that we worked. Anyways, I'll have to look at it and if that's something that we end up keeping. But yeah, one of the great things about the system is that we get to build these various different arrays and make them make sense within the context of our story. It doesn't always have to be strength, dex, con, int, wisdom, charisma. You know, it doesn't always have to be the same 6 for every, you know, game we ever play, kind of thing. If we decide that
might, moxie, nimbleness,
exactly. Yep. If we decide for you know, I'm not going to, you know, point any fingers, but if we decide that for this group intelligence isn't important, then we don't have to include that as a stat.
Yeah, I think that's pretty safe to say.
Wisdom is everything. We don't need intelligence. Learn through experience.
And yeah, like again, the distinctions, those are things that end up being really key. You know, again, it's the kind of the 3 big pillars, if you will, the defining kind of characteristics that are always a part of your character's actions and decisions. But they can also be used as a detriment, it's a brilliant piece of game design. So I'm really eager to see all of your characters put through an entirely different lens. I think it's going to be really interesting. Not only just mechanically, but also because I think it will cause the things that are truly important and significant to your characters to rise to the top in your consideration. You're going to have to think about who is your character really, as opposed to, race, class, these chosen feats. So, and all of you know your characters very well at this point. So I think it's going to be a really interesting, almost like an actor's exercise, like kind of taking a deep dive into what makes the character. So, Valor for Sir John, that's a good one. Definitely.
Yeah, it seems to me like, I just feel like if this is a tale of fealty, courage, and woe, then all three of those words need to be in some capacity in the mechanics as well. And like
Agreed.
Valor and courage are closely enough related that I'm like, God, I do love Valor, but courage is already on the page,
Valor
It's
itself
Yep.
is cooler.
yeah, it's a little more all encompassing or whatever, but I don't know. I think between the values and also our distinctions and all the other things, like we can definitely fit in ideas of valor and courage both in
I agree.
their own unique-
Right. I mean, even if one of your three pillars is, valorous knight, valorous whatever, right? Like that
Yep.
just puts it right in there.
Mhm, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I'm excited to, like I said, to kind of peel back the layers on this and kind of really lay this all out and discuss the finite details about how each of these traits is going to look, whether or not it's going to, fit our needs, what we kind of see as far as what it's going to bring to the game. So I'm excited to kind of go through that experiment with y'all.
Mhm.
Okay. Is there any other questions or comments or concerns or anything that anybody wants to voice before we hop off for the evening? No?
Steve
Okay.
mentioned something about getting back together a week prior.
Well, I was
Could that
saying
just
like,
via messaging.
yeah, via messaging was my thought.
Yeah, as long as like I have enough time to put together the character sheets for you to fill out before we play again, then yeah, it should be fine.
Okay, if there's going to be a character sheet, I'm less concerned.
Yes. Yeah. Like I said, I have one drafted up that's for the Firefly game. There are character sheets that kind of exist for Cortex Prime, but because it's all up in the air as far as what parts that you use and what you don't, some pages only have like 3 or 4 traits, others have like 13. So, it's kind of hard to make a universal sheet, but once we kind of land on what we want as a part of the game, I'll draft up a character sheet and I'll send it to everybody. So cool. All right. Well, thank all of you very, very much for being willing to kind of use this session to sit down and have this discussion and go over this, as well as for entertaining the idea in the first place. So I appreciate that deeply. I love all of you, care about all of you very much, and I'm glad that we can all remain a part of the game and make these kinds of fundamental changes to a long-established, long-running game and still have everybody excited and on board and eager to offer insight and input into what it means for the game. So to me, that's a huge thing. That's a huge testament to how good this group is, to how strong this campaign has been so far, and without a doubt, it's largely due to the input from the 5 of you and the encouragement that the 5 of you not only give to each other but also to me, and the setting itself. So it means a ton to me, genuinely. All right. I guess what else? If you did happen to watch along this evening, thank you for tuning in. I know this is a little bit of a departure from your regularly scheduled programming. with any luck. I think we have our date for next month. I don't recall what it is off the top of my head, but I think it's in the latter half of May. So we'll be back with any luck at that point with brand new character sheets and a whole new system, but same old characters.
Same old characters.
Yeah. Same old
You
story.
could say it.
Same bat channel, same bat time. So yeah, I hugely appreciate everybody who follows this game. It matters a lot to me to see that people enjoy the story as much as we've enjoyed being a part of it. So it is really, really special to me. So do all the things that YouTube likes. Hit a like button, subscribe, share the link around to people that you want to see talk about Cortex Prime for an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever. But it is hugely appreciated. It gets motion on the channel here, and the algorithm likes that shit. So, what else? Kindness is a free action. I say this at the end of every game, but it's no less true. This world is dauntingly terrible at times, and it seems like that's just grown more and more the case. So, kindness costs you absolutely nothing, and most people deserve and need more of it in their life. So if it's a resource you can give away for free, then let's do it. I think that's everything else that I've got. So thank you, everyone. Until next time, may your dice roll high and your snacks always be within reach.
Cheat me of all Talar Kingdom.